The metal bottle came down at his skull. He didn't step back. He stepped in, trapped the arm, found the neck, pulled the man away from the concrete edge that would have killed him. The janitor, the one they'd spent 3 weeks destroying on camera. He saved him anyway. 30 million people saw the lie. 5 million saw the truth. The lawyers came with a number, $1.2 million, and a story built to bury him. He walked into that courtroom alone. No lawyer, no money, no plan, just 14 years of something they couldn't edit out. The floor told him everything. That was the thing nobody understood about Elijah Cross. They saw the mop. They never saw the man holding it. And the man holding it had buried his son 14 years ago and hadn't stopped moving since. He wasn't just cleaning the gym at 5 in the morning. He was reading it. Every scuff mark, every drag, every place where a foot had stopped moving the way it should. He moved the mop in long, even strokes. Left to right, no wasted motion. The fluorescent lights buzzed on one row at a time, the way they always did, like they were waking up slow, like they needed a minute. Elijah didn't need a minute. He'd been awake since 3. Iron Summit MMA sat on the east side of Detroit, wedged between a check cashing place and a tire shop that had been closed for 6 years. From the outside, it looked like nothing. Corrugated metal, a faded logo "Go" above the door. 2 windows that hadn't been properly cleaned since the Obama administration. Inside was different. Inside smelled like rubber and ambition and the sweat of people who were trying to become something. The main mat was 40 feet across. The bags hung heavy along the far wall. The cage in the back corner had a dent in the lower left panel that had been there since 2019, and nobody had gotten around to fixing. Elijah knew every inch of this place. He'd been coming here for 9 years, not to fight, not to train, to clean. He found the problem near the heavy bag of digs at 6:14 that morning. A streak of dried blood, small, maybe 2 inches. Someone had caught a split lip the night before and hadn't mentioned it. Elijah crouched down slowly, the way men crouch when their knees have opinions, and looked at it carefully. He knew whose blood it was before he stood back up. The drag pattern nearby, the way the foot had pivoted wrong. Whoever it was had a problem with their right hip they weren't telling their coach about. He cleaned it up. He said nothing to anyone because nobody had asked. The first morning it happened, the thing people would later slow down and replay 1,000 times, started with a barbell. It slipped off the rack at 6:40. Nobody's fault. The collar hadn't been tightened right. The bar tilted, the weight shifted, 45-pound timbs of steel went sideways toward the floor. Elijah's hand caught it, not after he saw it falling, not after he turned to look before. His hand was simply there, at the right height, at the right angle. The bar settled into his palm like it had been placed there on purpose. The maintenance tech from across the room looked up, blinked, laughed a little. Lucky catch, old man. Elijah set the barbell back on the rack, adjusted the collar so it wouldn't happen again. Yeah, he said, and went back to mopping. He was 68 years old, 6 feet even, maybe 175 pounds on a good day. White stubble cut close to his jaw. Hands that looked like they'd been built from something harder than skin. The knuckles wide, the palms calloused in places that didn't come from pushing a mop. He walked slowly, always. But not because he couldn't move fast. Watch him long enough and details started surfacing. He never put full weight on both heels at the same time. When he turned a corner, he turned from the center of his body, not just his neck. When someone walked too close behind him in the hallway, his shoulder dropped half an inch, automatic, unconscious, like something inside him was always measuring the distance between himself and everything else. Nobody watched him long enough to notice. That was the thing about being the man who cleaned the gym. You became part of the building, like the water fountain that always ran a little cold, like the third locker from the left that never closed all the way. People stopped seeing you after a while. They just walked around you, and the longer it went on, the more invisible you became, until you were less a person and more a feature of the room, something that existed in the background of other people's more important days. Elijah had understood this for 9 years. He had never decided how he felt about it. He drove home at noon on Tuesdays and Thursdays. The other days he worked a split shift, morning hours, then back in the evening to clean up after the last class. His house was on Crane Street, a small brick 2-story that had been paid off since 2009. The neighborhood had changed around it twice since then. Different faces, different problems. Same street. Inside was quiet in a way that had weight to it. There were books on the shelves, real books, history, biology, a worn copy of Marcus Aurelius that had been read so many times the spine had given up. There was a kitchen table with 2 chairs, though only one ever got used, a couch that faced a window instead of a television. On the mantel over the fireplace, a photograph, face down, dusted every week with the same careful hand, never lifted, and in the bedroom closet on the top shelf behind a folded winter coat, stark wood, brass lock, small about the size of a shoebox but heavier. The kind of weight that doesn't come from what's inside, it comes from what those things mean. The key to the lock hung on a chain around Elijah's neck, under his shirt, against his sternum. He'd worn it for 14 years. He wore it to bolt up to bed. He wore it in the shower. One time the chain broke and he drove to 3 different hardware stores at 9 o'clock at night until he found the right replacement. He had not opened the box in 14 years, not once. Some nights he took it down from the shelf, held it on his knees, sat in the dark for a while. Then he put it back. Then he went to sleep. Damon Reeves had been coming to Turn Summit since he was 19. He was 26, now 6'1". 210 pounds of physical talent that had never once been told it had a ceiling. His record was 14-0, 14 fights, 14 finishes. The kind of highlight reel that made sports editors smile and rival fighters study tape at midnight. The talent was real. That was the problem. Because real talent doesn't need humility to survive. It can go a long time without it. And Damon had gone 26 years without anyone making the idea seem necessary. He trained like the gym was lucky to have him, which, financially speaking, it sort of was. His father, Carter Reeves, had written a check to Iron Summit 3 years ago, a sponsorship, enough to repaint the exterior, replace 8 heavy bags, and add the new cage in the back corner. Carter Reeves had his name on half the new construction downtown. Hotels, condos. A parking structure on Michigan Avenue that everyone agreed was ugly, but nobody did anything about. Carter came to the gym twice a year. He stood near the door. He checked his phone. He watched the ending of whatever Damon was doing. Never the beginning, never the middle. He watched the last 10 minutes, nodded at Jerome Nash, and left. Damon would look over after the session and find the spot by the door empty again and say nothing about it to anyone. He had been saying nothing about it for 26 years. Jerome Nash ran Iron Summit the way a man runs something that isn't really his. He was 41. A former fighter himself, regional titles in his late 20s, a brief management career after that, and then this. Head coach. His name was on the website. His voice was loudest in the building between the hours of 10 and 2. He was not a bad coach. He was not a bad man. He was a man who had learned, slowly and then all at once, so that certain things were easier not to say. Damon was a problem that came with a signed check attached, and Jerome had a mortgage and 2 kids in middle school, a wife who had gone back to school part-time, and the numbers just worked better if he kept his mouth shut. So he kept his mouth shut, and Damon kept doing what Damon did. Simone Walsh had worked the front desk at Iron Summit for 4 years. She was 34. Organized in the way people get when they've spent their whole lives keeping things together that other people let fall. She remembered every member's name and their renewal date, and which of them needed a reminder email, and which of them would cancel if you sent one. She kept the supply closet alphabetized. She watered the 2 office plants on alternating Wednesdays. She liked Elijah Crosses. Not in a way she'd said out loud to anyone, but she noticed things about him that other people didn't. He always rinsed the break room coffee pot when he finished instead of leaving it for the next person. He fixed things that weren't technically his job. A loose door hinge, a broken hook in the women's locker room, without mentioning it to anyone. When members were rude to him, which happened more than it should have, his expression didn't change. Not in the way of someone who'd stopped caring. In the way of someone who'd decided a long time ago that those moments weren't worth the energy it took to react. She'd always wanted to ask him something. She never had. Because you didn't stop the janitor to ask personal questions. That was just how it was. That was the invisible rule everybody followed without knowing they were following it. The boy showed up on a Tuesday night in October. Theo Burgess, 19 years old. Freshman at Wayne State, studying computer science. He had a gap between his last class and this and when his mother's nursing shift ended. And he'd started coming to the evening open session at Iron Summit 3 weeks ago because it was each to the gym near campus and closer to the bus stop. He was not talented, not yet. His stance was a problem from the ground up. Both feet pointed the same direction, which they shouldn't. His sat too far back on his heels, which meant every time he moved, he was already losing before the exchange started. His chin was high. His shoulders were tense. He threw punches the way people throw punches when they've watched a lot of videos and practiced in front of a mirror, but never been corrected by someone who knew what they were looking at. He was trying, though, hard. The coaches had gone home. It was 8:45 on a Tuesday. The only people left in the building were two guys rolling on the far mat, a woman hitting the speed bag, and Theo working combinations on the heavy bag with the focus of someone who desperately wanted to be better and had no roadmap for how to get there. Elijah came through with the mop. He wasn't planning to stop. He had 3 sections of floor left to do, and the break room still needed the counters wiped, and he was tired in the specific way of a 68-year-old man who'd been on his feet since 5 that morning. But he stopped, because the boy's back foot was doing something that was going to cause a problem eventually. Not today, but eventually. And Elijah Cross had spent enough of his life watching people develop problems that a single correction could have prevented. He set the mop against the wall. He walked to Theo. He tapped the boy's back foot with 2 fingers. Move it here. He turned Theo's hips with a hand on each side, open like this. He pressed 2 fingers under the boy's chin. Down, stay down. Then he stepped back, picked up his mop, kept walking. Theo stood exactly where he'd been placed for about 2 seconds. Then he threw the same combination he'd been throwing all night. The sound was different, completely different. The bag moved differently. Even the air around the impact felt different. Sharp and direct instead of scattered. Theo stared at his own hands. At the text, Simone Walsh's phone was ringing. She did not answer it. She was watching the old man push his mop into the dark hallway, and she was thinking about a question she'd never thought to ask before. Who taught the floor man to build a fighter in 3 touches? She didn't say it out loud. She opened the Notes app on her phone and typed it instead. 8:51 on a Tuesday night. She still had it, months later, when everything had already happened. Damon Reeves noticed Elijah Cross for the first time on a Wednesday. Not because of anything impressive. Because Elijah was in the way. Damon was walking from the cage to the water station, and Elijah had the mop bucket positioned in the middle of the hallway, not blocking it completely, but enough that Damon had to step around it. He didn't say anything the first time. He just moved around it, barely. The second time it happened, he said, "Hey, watch where you put that thing." Elijah moved the bucket, said nothing, which bothered Damon more than any response would have. Here is the thing about power without opposition. It gets restless. Damon had opponents in the cage, and he'd beaten all of them. He had Jerome telling him what to fix, and Carter texting numbers at him, and 60,000 followers telling him he was the future. And all of it, left this space inside him that felt like a room with too much air and not enough furniture. He needed something to push against. And the old man who cleaned the gym had started to look like something that wouldn't push back. It started small. A comment in front of other members. Something about getting out of the way. A laugh that invited others to laugh with it. People laughed. Of course they did. Damon's was the reason they came. Damon's was the energy in the room. When he pointed at something and laughed, the room laughed with him. That was just how it worked at this point. Elijah kept working. Jerome watched from across the room. Then he looked down at whatever was in his hand and found it very interesting. The second time was a shove, not hard. Staged, almost. The ways you shove something when you want the audience more than the impact. Elijah's shoulder hit the wall. His bucket swayed. He steadied it. He looked at the floor. He kept mopping. Damon pulled out his phone, posted it. 1,200 views overnight. The comment section was not kind, but it was loud, and Damon had learned, the way people learn things they probably shouldn't, that loudness and kindness occupied completely separate real estate. 3 days later, someone locked Elijah's supply cart in the sauna. The handles were hot when he found it, not dangerous, but hot. He didn't report it. He got the cart out, let the handles cool, put the cart where it belonged. The next morning, someone had dumped a full container of protein powder across the section of lobby Elijah had just finished mopping. White powder everywhere, wall to wall. Damon filmed the cleanup. Caption: Mop Man's got a new project, 400,000 views in 24 hours. She didn't say anything to Jerome, because she had said something to Jerome once already, and he'd said what managers say when they don't want to be responsible for anything. Boys blow off steam. Elijah hasn't complained. That part was true. Elijah hadn't complained. But Simone went home that night and sat in her car in her driveway for 12 minutes before going inside. And the next morning, before the security system ran its nice nightly overwrite, she plugged a small external drive into the back of the desk computer and copied the previous 24 hours of footage. She didn't know exactly why yet. She just knew someone should. The hallway game started the following Tuesday. Damon stood in the center of the corridor, arms wide, the kind of posture that performs even when there's no audience because the body has already decided, Sedges is on. Elijah came around the corner with his cart. He stopped, looked at Damon. Damon grinned. Bow to the champ first. It's tradition. Elijah was quiet for a moment. Then he bent forward. Small, slow eyes down. The camera loved it. 50 seconds of footage that 3 million people would watch over the next 4 days. 3 million people who would have no context for what came before or after. 3 million people who would see an old man bend and a young man grin and draw their own conclusions about who was who in that hallway. Simone copied the footage that night. She didn't sleep well. The challenge came on a Saturday. Damon had just posted his best training week to date. Jerome had confirmed a fight offer for February. The supplement deal had come through, first payment already in the account. Everything was accelerating, and acceleration needs an event. He waited until the gym was full. Open mat. Maybe 60 members. The live stream which had started running on the flat screen above the water station. He killed the music. Everybody listen up. The room gathered the way rooms gather around a center of gravity. I've got a special event. I thank you to my supporters, he smiled, and challenged to our most beloved member. He turned toward the far side of the room. Elijah was at the mop, the gray water still in the bucket, not moving. Damon walked toward him. 60 seconds, Damon said. The room had gone quiet enough that it carried easily. You and me, right here. 60 seconds on the mat. Or you get down and shine my shoes. Your choice, old man. He peeled $500 from a money clip, set it on the edge of the mat. Winner takes it. Elijah looked at the money, then at Damon, then at the room full of phones. I'm 68 years old, he said. I clean floors. Then you'll clean easy, same it. And the room laughed. I have work to finish after you lose. Damon stepped closer. Come on. 1 minute. I'll close my eyes. More laughter. Someone started to chant. Low at first, then it caught. Elijah looked at the mat, then he looked up, directly at Damon. Everyone falls, he said, quiet enough that only the front row heard it clearly. Some just haven't met the floor yet. Damon laughed loudest of all. Tomorrow, noon. Be here or everyone knows what you chose. He looked back at the crowd. Mopman versus the chariot. The room erupted. Jerome materialized near the edge of the mat, looked at the money, looked at the crowd, went back to his office. Elijah pushed his cart to the supply room. He sat on an overturned crate between the bottles of industrial cleaner and the stack of spare mats. He pulled out his phone. The basic kind, nothing fancy. He opened the calendar app, looked at tomorrow's date, sat very still. November 14th. He'd worked every November 14th for 9 years. He'd never once looked at the date and felt it as a number. It was always just a D. Another shift, another floor. But someone had chosen it for a circus. And now it was both things at once, and he didn't know how to hold them separately. November 14th was the day the state police had come to his door, hats in hand. That particular putcherman take when the news they're carrying, they kind of changes the shape of a person. A silver Honda. Interstate 75, just outside the city circus. Caleb Cross had been 21 years old. He had been driving to the biggest fight of his life. Elijah sat in the supply room for a long time. Then he stood up, turned the light off, walked through the empty gym, all the members gone by now, the machines quiet, the mat empty, and out through the side door to the parking lot. He sat in his truck without starting it. He did not turn the key for 20 minutes. He watched a pigeon walk across the hood and leave again. He watched the streetlight on the corner flicker twice and hold. Then he drove home. He made tea he didn't drink. He stood at the kitchen window and looked at the dark street below. A car passed, then nothing. The neighborhood settled into its late-night rhythm, distant and unhurried. Then he went to the bedroom closet. He took the wooden box off the top shelf, carried it to the bed, sat down with it on his knees the way he sometimes did. Except this time his thumb found the lock without him making a conscious decision about it. He turned the key. The lid opened slowly. Inside were three things: a photograph, four people standing in a gym that no longer existed, a banner overhead that read State Junior Championship, three teenagers and one man in his mid-40s, all of them grinning the way people grin when they've just won something they worked a long time to win. One of the teenagers had Elijah's jaw and his mother's his eyes. He was holding a trophy half the size of himself, and looking at the camera like the world was a very good place to be. Caleb Cross, 17 years old, 4 years before the silver Honda, 4 years before the state police came to the door. Below the photograph, folded carefully, was a small training uniform, white, gone cream, with age at the collar and cuffs, the size of an 8-year-old. The size of a boy on the first day his father put him on a mat and said, "Watch my feet. Not my hands, so feet are where the truth is." And below that, a document. A registration form for a regional invitational tournament, the kind that would have been the last qualifying event before the Nationals. Fighter ID printed at the top, a name printed below it in a font that had no idea what was coming 2 weeks later. C. Cross, Regional Invitational. Fighter IZ-eyed 00 filled it out himself, had sat at this same table and gone through every field, weight class, age, emergency contact. He'd put his own name in that last box, the ways he always did, because Caleb's mother had been gone by then, and it was just the two of them. He'd driven Caleb to the venue the morning of registration, waited in the parking lot while his sons went inside to hand the form over, watched him walk back to the car, forward, with that particular walk that 21-year-olds have when they've just done something that confirms what they already believed about themselves. 2 weeks later, the silver Honda, and the form had come back in the mail. Returned to sender, event canceled due to venue damage. Elijah had held it for a long time at the kitchen table. Then he'd put it in the box and locked it and hung the key around his neck, and he had not opened the box again, until now. He sat with the lid open and looked at all three things: the photograph, the uniform, the form with his son's name on it. He did not take anything out. He closed the lid, he locked it, put it back on the shelf. He went to the kitchen, made tea again. This time standing at the counter, looking at the dark window and the faint reflection of himself looking back. He had a decision to make. The decision wasn't really about Damon Reeves. It had never been about Damon Reeves. It was about whether a 68-year-old man who had put down the only thing he was ever truly great at, who had walked away from it because he couldn't figure out how to stay in the same world as the mats, where he'd taught his son, whether that man could step onto one again. For 60 seconds, in front of strangers, without a belt, without a rank, without anything except what 14 years of carrying grief quietly to his understanding of what actually mattered. He set the mug in the sink, went to the bedroom, got into bed, lay in the dark with his eyes open for a long while. He thought about the boy in the photograph. 17 years old and grinning like the world was a good place to be. He thought about the walk back to the car after registration. That particular walk, the one what had been watched develop since the boy was 8 years old and first learning what his body could do. He thought about what it meant to raise someone toward something, and what it meant when the something arrived and the person didn't. He closed his eyes. At 5 the next morning, Elijah Cross woke up before his alarm. He made coffee, stood at the counter. He did not go to the closet. He did not take the box down. He already knew what was in it, and he already knew what he was going to do. He got his jacket. He picked up his keys. He stood at the door for a moment, just stood there, feeling the weight of the day already, the specific weight of November 14th, the weight of whatever was going to happen at noon in a room full of phones. Then he walked out, because the floor was going to need reading before anyone arrived. Because some habits are the bones of a person, the deep structural things that hold you upright when everything else has shifted. Because 68 years old means you have stopped pretending that the things you carry don't have weight. And you have also stopped pretending that weight is the same thing as defeat. And because somewhere under 14 years of silence and early mornings and a key worn warm against his sternum, Elijah Cross still knew how to walk into a room like he understood the ground beneath it. He just hadn't let anyone see it, yet. The cemetery was called Elmwood. It sat on the east side of Detroit, behind a low iron fence that had been repainted so many times that had become structural. Old oaks everywhere. Trees that had been watching people grieve long enough to stop being surprised by it. The paths between the stones were narrow and familiar. The kind of familiar that comes from walking the same ground in the same direction so many times your feet know the way before your eyes do. Elijah arrived before sunrise. He came through the east gate, left at the maple, straight until the path curved. Then the two stones side by side, the way they'd been for 11 years since Ruth had joined their son. He set two folding chairs in the grass, one for him, one for the space beside him. He poured coffee from a thermos, drank half, set the cup on the ground between the chairs like he was waiting for someone who was just running late. For a while he didn't say anything. The sky went from black to dark blue to the gray that comes just before first light. The oaks moved a little, the city hummed low and distant beyond the fence. A bird started somewhere in the branches above, then stopped, then started again, working something out. Then Achazlaz looked at the smaller stone. Caleb Jerome Cross, beloved son, gone at 21. Someone picked today, Elijah said. Not performing, not asking for anything. Just talking the way you talk to someone you've been talking to for a long time. Of all the days there are, he picked this one. The oaks moved. I don't think he knew. He doesn't know about you. He doesn't know about any of it. He looked down at the coffee cup. That's almost worse somehow, that it wasn't even deliberate. He was quiet again for a while. A cardinal landed on Ruth's stone, looked at him with the absolute indifference of a bird who has no sense of occasion. Then left. I'm not going up there to hurt him. I want you to know that. I'm going up there because 60 seconds on a mat is 60 seconds. And the rest of it, what he did, what he put online, what people said, that'll outlast 60 seconds if I don't answer it. He paused. Your grandfather used to say the floor doesn't lie. Whatever you do on it, the floor keeps the record. I've been mopping floors for 9 years, trying to remember how to stand one again. He finished the coffee, stood slowly, folded both chairs under one arm. Looked at the stone one more time. I'll stand straight, he said. I promise you that much. He walked back to the truck, sat in it for a few minutes before starting the engine. The cemetery was fully light now, that flat gray November light that doesn't cast shadows. He could see 3 other people at different points along the paths, each of them in their own version of this same morning. And if he felt the familiar weight of being in a place where loss is the common language, and everyone speaks it differently, he drove home. He had one thing to do before noon. He went to the bedroom closet and took the box from the shelf, set it on the bed, unlocked it. He had opened it the night before for the first time in 14 years, and opening it the second time was different. Not easier, just different. The way a door feels different after you've already gone through it once. He looked at the 3 things inside, the photograph, the small uniform, the registration form with Caleb's name. He reached past all of them. Below the uniform, folded flat against the bottom of the box, was the gi. He hadn't looked at it in 14 years. White, gone cream at the collar and the sleeve ends. No belt. He'd put the belt somewhere else, years back, somewhere he'd stopped keeping track of, because the belt only matters when you're teaching, and he had stopped doing that. He lifted it out, held it up, checked the shoulders, the length. Still right. He as he dressed in the quiet bedroom with the November light coming through the curtains and the box bed on the bed and Caleb's photograph face up beside it. He did not look at himself in the mirror before he left. He didn't need to. By 11:30, the parking lot at Iron Summit was already past full. Cars on the sidewalk. Cars up the block in both directions. Someone had set up a lawn chair next to the tire shop next door, like they were waiting for a parade. 3 people had cameras on tripods positioned outside the front window. Damon's live stream counter was at 14,000 and climbing. Inside was louder than it had ever been on a Saturday. Members who didn't usually come had come because they'd seen the clips. Members who'd told someone who posted it somewhere. The main mat had been cleared and the crowd pressed around 3 sides of it. Phones everywhere. The energy in the room was the energy of people who are expecting something easy, a spectacle, a confirmation, a story whose ending they already know. Damon stood in his corner in a team jacket with his name across the back, rolling his neck, talking to 2 guys who laughed at whatever he said slightly too quickly. The $500 sat on the edge of the mat under a water bottle. Jerome Nash was somewhere near the back wall, not watching the mat, watching his phone. Simone Walsh was at the front desk, not working, watching the door. Theo Burgess had arrived early and found a spot against the back wall. He'd come because he trained here, and because something about the past week had made him feel, in a way he couldn't have articulated, that he needed to see how this ended. He had his phone in his hand. He raised it without deciding to, started recording without thinking about it first. At 11:58, the crowd shifted. Not dramatically, just shifted. The way a room shifts when something changes that nobody can quite name yet. Elijah Cross came through the side entrance. Cream-colored gi, no belt, bare feet. A canvas bag over one shoulder that he set down near the wall without ceremony, without looking at the crowd, without acknowledging the size of the room or the number of phones pointed at him. The laughter started in the back and moved forward. Comments about the pajamas, about the lost and found, about the dry cleaner. Elijah didn't look at the crowd. He looked at the mat. He studied it the way he'd studied every floor for 9 years, reading it. Then he stepped onto it. And the way he stepped, the way his bare foot landed, and his weight settled, and his hips moved. Something about it made the laughter in the immediate front row go quiet before the back row even noticed. He walked to the center, stood still. Damon crossed toward him, arms wide. "Nice pajamas, Gramps, those from the lost and found?" Elijah looked at him. "They were a gift," he said. 60 seconds, Damon said. "Try to survive." 60 seconds, Elijah said. "Try to listen." Damon's grin tightened slightly at the corners. "Let's listen to what?" "Your own breathing," Elijah said. "It's about to get loud." Jerome stepped to the mat's edge, raised a hand, dropped it. Someone hit a timer on their phone. The numbers started moving. 60 seconds began. Here is what the live stream showed. Damon came out fast. A faint left. Then the right cross, the one that had finished 11 of his 14 opponents. Fast, measured. He'd thrown that exact punch at least 40,000 times. His shoulder knew the path before his brain sent the signal. It hit nothing. Elijah's was not where the punch arrived. His head had moved offline by maybe 4 inches. No more than that, just enough. His feet made almost no sound on the mat. Damon threw the hook. The one he set up after the cross, the combination his whole offense was built around. Left hook, head level, the kind that turns lights off. The air where Elijah's head had been received it without complaint. Damon reset. Threw again, differently this time. A body shot, changed the level, force a reaction. Elijah's right elbow dropped 1.5 inches. The punch glanced off the forearm and died. His weight had already moved before the contact finished. The gym was still laughing places, but quieter. The laughter of people who are beginning to suspect the joke is not the one they thought it was. Here is what the live stream didn't show. Or rather, here is what the live stream showed, but couldn't explain. What it would take coaches and fighters and people who had spent decades studying body movement to articulate later, when they slowed the footage down frame for frame and uploaded their analyses and watched those videos get 2 million views apiece. Elijah Cross was not defending himself. He was teaching. Every time he moved, every deflection, every weight shift, every half step offline, he was moving in a way that left Damon's own errors visible. The over-rotation on the right cross. The dropped rear hand on the hook. The way Damon's weight committed forward 0.2 of a second before his technique could support it. He wasn't explaining these things. He was moving around them, framing them. The way a teacher frames a problem, not by solving it, but by clearing away everything that isn't the problem, so student can finally see it clearly. Damon didn't know this yet. The people in the gym didn't know this yet. But Theo Burgess, against the back wall with his phone raised, was watching very carefully. Because 3 weeks ago, a man with a mop had fixed his entire technique in 3 wordless corrections, and he recognized something in what was happening on that mat, even if he couldn't have named it yet. He kept recording. 20 seconds in, nobody in the building was laughing. Damon's breathing had already changed. He was throwing harder, which made him slower. He was planting his feet to generate power, which made him easier to read. Every adjustment he made to try to catch the old man created a new opening that the old man didn't take. Which was the strangest thing. Elijah wasn't countering, wasn't hitting back, wasn't trading. He was moving, patient, unhurried, like a man who had somewhere else to be eventually but was in no rush to get there. The live stream chat, which had started with jokes about the outfit, had gone quiet in the way that digital spaces almost never go quiet. Individual comments were still coming in, but they were different now, confused, asking questions. Is this real? Why isn't he swinging back? Who is this guy? The countdown rolled past 50,000 viewers. Damon couldn't hear any of it. All he could hear was his own lungs. which were, as promised, getting loud. 31 seconds, Damon stopped boxing. His technique had started fracturing under the pressure of hitting nothing, and when technique fractures in a fighter like Damon, trained for explosion, trained for the first 2 minutes, trained to end things early.
What comes outside is insane.
Raw, fast, unfiltered, he shot for the double leg. His body dropped and drove forward toward Elijah's knees, the kind of takedown that has finished fights and put people on their backs who had no business going down, that relies on speed and angle and the sudden commitment of 210 pounds of moving weight. This was the moment that would be replayed, slowly, from 6 different angles. With commentary, people freaks makus their kurbers exactly this type of exchange. Because Elijah didn't sprawl, didn't jump back, didn't do any of the standard defensive responses that any trained eye would have anticipated. He dropped his hips, met the incoming shoulders with open hands, and turned, just turned, a quarter rotation, his own hips as the axis. Nothing wasted, nothing extra. Damon's speed, all of it, did the rest. Physics and repaid to the floor. Damon went up and over the quiet hip and kicked on his back with a sound that went through the floor of the building and into the feet of everyone standing on it. 300 people inhaled at the same time. Nobody exhaled. Damon lay on the mat staring at the ceiling. Elijah stood over him, hands open, offering. "Breathe," he said. "You're fine. The floor caught you." Damon scrambled to his feet. At frost dusk, Simone Walsh had stopped pretending to work, both hands pressed over her mouth. On the security monitor behind the desk, camera 3 was still recording, the wide angle. Both men. Every step she looked at the recording indicator. She hit protect on the file. She did it without looking away from the mat. The second's fall came at 44 seconds. Damon came back with something broken loose behind his eyes, not just anger, humiliation, which is a different animal, faster, less careful, less interested in winning than in making something stop. He charged, both hands reaching, so set up, no technique. Just weight and velocity, and the absolute refusal to be the person this was making him look like. Elijah stepped off the line, stunts, diagonal. The way water moves around a stone without deciding to, he guided the reaching arm past us target with his right hand. A touch, really. Just enough to borrow Damon's direction and extend it slightly past where Damon wanted to go. Damon's momentum wrote its own ending. He hit the mat face down, slid a foot and a half, stopped exactly at the base of his own live stream tripod. The camera looked down at him. 60,000 people looked with it. 10 seconds left. Damon rose. His face had changed. Both the performance was gone now. The grin, the audience awareness, the constant calculation of how this was playing, all of it stripped away. What was underneath was something rawer and younger than 26. Something that had been waiting behind all the wins and the follower counts and the supplement deals and the spot by the door where his father used to stand for the last 10 minutes and then leave. He reached sideways, grabbed the metal water bottle from the mat's edge, swung it at Elijah's head. The gym screamed. Not cheering, screaming. The sound an audience makes when some crosses a line they didn't know was there until it got crossed. Here is what happened next. Elijah moved inside the arc of the swing. Not away from it, into it. His left hand trapped the swinging arm above the wrist. His right hip turned. The throw began. Halfway through it, Damon's head was aimed at the concrete lip beyond the mat's edge, and Elijah's right hand shot out. Palm open, up the back of Damon's neck. He pulled him in, changed the angle of the fall, brought it back to the soft vinyl, laid him down. Like something fragile, like something worth saving, like someone whose head mattered, even when the rest of his choices hadn't. The phone timer sang. 60 seconds finished. The room was the quietest it had ever been. 300 people, 60,000 online, and Elijah's cross, the center, breathing the way men breathe in libraries, in the calm of someone who had just done a very difficult thing without making it look difficult. He bowed. To Damon, to the mat, to something nobody else in the room could see. Then he picked up his canvas bag from the wall, stepped off the mat, left the $500 exactly where it was, walked toward the exit through assistants you could have built walls with. Theo Burgess watched him go, phone still raised, still recording. He stood there for a few seconds after Elijah had gone through the door, then slowly lowered his arm. He looked at his screen. The footage was clear. All of it. From his angle at the back, the only angle in the room that caught the full width of the mat, you could see everything. The shove at the beginning, the money on the mat's edge, the water bottle, the falls, the hand at the neck. He didn't post it. He didn't know what to do with it. He stood there, holding it while the room around him slowly came back to life, and he thought about texting his mother, and then decided that was exactly what he should do. He sent it to her with no message. She would know what to do. She always did. Damon stayed on the mat for a while, staring at the lights. 60 seconds a sink ago, he had been undefeated. 14-0, the future, the highlight reel, the name on the jacket. Now he was a meme being born in real time, and he could feel it the way you feel weather changing, the drop in pressure, the shift in the air before the storm announces itself. He could feel the phones still pointed at him. He had spent his entire career knowing exactly where the phones were, the angle, the frame, the way a moment looks versus the way it feels. He had always known how to use that gap. He didn't know how to use it now. Somewhere in his chest, under the rage, under the humiliation, under the very loud story he was already constructing about what had just happened, and whose fault it was, somewhere in there lived a feeling he couldn't name yet. It felt almost like awe. The kind that comes when you encounter something so completely outside your experience that your categories for it don't exist yet. He buried it immediately, reached for the angers instead. Anger was familiar. Anger had a shape he knew. But the hand at his neck, the old man pulling his skull away from the concrete with the same automatic care that you'd pull a child back from a curb. That image was not going to go where he needed it to go. It kept coming back. It kept meaning something he wasn't ready for it to mean. He got up, got his bag, walked out of the gym without looking at anyone. The edited video dropped 3 days later, 90 seconds, expertly cut. Gone was the shove before the timer. Gone was the money on the mat. Gone was the water bottle, swinging at a gray head. Gone was the hand catching the neck. What remained was an old man in a strange uniform, throwing a younger man onto his back times while a crowd watched. The falls made to look unprovoked. The old man made to look predatory. The caption had been prepared in advance. Hidden fighter assaults, local athlete at Detroit gym. Carter Reeves had people for this. His lawyer, a woman named Hargrove, who wore gray exclusively and had the kind of competence that made you tired just watching it work, delivered the story to 3 local news stations simultaneously. The story had everything. Surprise, an unsuspecting victim, an old man with secrets. Zankers used the word disturbing twice before the first commercial break. By Thursday morning, the internet had made up its mind. The same internet that had watched 60,000 people watch an old man make a trained fighter look like a beginner had now watched 30 million people watch a very different version of the same 60 seconds. And 30 million beats 60,000. It's not opinion. That's math. The contents turned the way weather turns, all at once without warning, the whole sky changing direction. Why was a trained killer working around regular people? What was he hiding? Someone should look into his background. The 60,000 views of the truth were not gone. They were buried, under volume, under repetition, under the weight of a story told loudly enough and consistently enough that people began believing it simply to make the noise stop. Elijah Cross did not have social media accounts. He had no way to answer 30 million views, so he didn't. He found out about the firing on a Thursday morning. He drove to Iron Summit at his usual time, parked in his usual spot, walked to the side entrance with his key in his hand. The key didn't fit. He tried it twice, then stood in the parking lot for a moment, looking at the door, holding the key in his palm. Jerome Nash came outside. He had an envelope in his hand, and the posture of a man delivering a speech he's rehearsed enough times to know it, but not enough times to feel comfortable with it. Liability situation, Jerome said. His eyes were on the pavement. The board, the insurance, it's just, we have to. How long have I been here? Elijah asked. 9 years, which is why we wanted to. 9 years, Elijah said. Not angry, just saying it, holding the number up to the morning like something he was checking for damage. Jerome held out the envelope. 2 weeks severance. And look, Elijah, this could all go away. The Reeves are prepared to make simple, a statement on camera. You say it was a misunderstanding. You apologize. They drop everything. You keep the severance, pension included. Elijah looked at the envelope. Then he looked at Jerome. Jerome was still looking at the pavement. Tell them, Elijah said, that I have been mom floors in that building for 9 years, and I have never missed a corner. Tell them my knees don't bend that direction. He handed the envelope back. Jerome stood there, holding it with both hands, looking at it like a man looking at something he's partly responsible for, and can't put down and can't keep. Elijah walked to his truck, got in, started the engine, let it run for a minute, then drove home. The summonses arrived on Saturday. Certified mail. He summoned for it at the door, brought it inside, sat down at the kitchen table and read it through twice. Reeves versus Cross. Damages sought $1.2 million. Civil suit. Assault and battery. 3 counts of injury to the plaintiff. He set it down next to a stack of bills and a pension statement he'd been meaning to look at. The math was clear and it was merciless. Even winning would cost more than he had. Lawyers cost more than 9 years of custodial wages can save, and losing meant a number that made everything else irrelevant. The house on Crane Street, the paid-off quiet of it, all of it. He sat at the table for a long time. He made coffee, didn't drink it, made it again, drank half. The afternoon came in through the window and moved across the floor the way light moves in November, low and slanted, like it's not sure it has permission to be there. He picked up his phone, called the number for the court-appointed legal aid office, got a voicemail, left a message saying he would represent himself and was declining to settle. He set the phone down, sat back. He thought about Caleb in the car on Interstate 75. 4 hours of driving towards something he'd been preparing for since he was 8 years old. He had not second-guessed it, had not pulled over and called to say he wasn't so sure, had gotten in the car and driven toward the thing, the way you do when someone has spent 8 years teaching you that showing up is the first form of courage. That was the part Elijah had spent 14 years trying to understand. Not the accident, not the specific mechanics of loss, but the fact that his son had gotten in the car, had driven toward his fight. Without hesitation, Elijah was not going to sign an apology for standing on a mat for 60 seconds and not throwing a single punch. Not because he was stubborn, because Caleb had driven toward his fight. The least his father could do was show up for his own. That night, the real weight came down. He went to the bedroom, opened the closet, took the box from the shelf, brought it to the bed. He unlocked it. He looked at the 3 things inside. Then he did he hadn't done before. He reached in and lifted out the small uniform, the one from when Caleb was 8, white, gone cream with age. He held it for a moment, feeling the soft, specific weight of it. The weight of something folded and refolded in the same creases until the fabric remembered its own shape. He stood up. He put it on over his shirt. The sleeves stopped at his forearms. The hems stopped at his ribs. It didn't fit. Of course it didn't fit. It was made for an 8-year-old beginning to learn what his body could do. But he stood in it. In the dark bedroom, in the November quiet, wearing his dead son's first training uniform, Elijah stood very still. He wasn't performing anything. There was no one to perform for. He was just standing inside the shape of someone he had lost, measuring the distance between who he was and who he'd been when that person was still alive. He stood there until he knew what he needed to know. He knew it wasn't his fault. He had known that for years in the part of himself that deals in facts. But knowing something and having finished with it are different things. And standing in the dark in that small uniform, he understood that he had been carrying not the guilt exactly, but the shape that guilt had made inside him, the hollow it had dug. And that hollow had been the reason the box stayed locked and the photograph stayed face down, and the mat stayed something he cleaned but did not stand on. He took the uniform off, folded it carefully, put it back, closed the box, locked it, hung the key back around his neck. He was not going to sign the apology. He was not going to give Carter Reeves the story he wanted, and he was going to walk into that courtroom the same way he'd walked onto that mat, in whatever he had left with, whatever he'd kept. He went to the kitchen, sat down. The summons was still on the table. He looked at it for a moment without picking it up. Then he looked at the window, at his own faint reflection in the dark glass. He had one more thing to do. He picked up his phone and called Corbett Washington's number. It rang 4 times, then voicemail. He started to leave Isabel a message, got 3 words in. Stop. Thought about what he was actually trying to say and whether he was capable of saying it. He hung up without finishing. He sat in the kitchen for a while longer. Then he went to bed. Corbett Washington saw the live stream that evening from his office in Columbus. He twitched twice. The real one, the 60s in view version, not the edited 30 million view version. He watched it at his desk with the door closed, leaning forward with his elbows on his knees, the way he used to lean forward watching tape when he was still competing. He watched the hand catch the neck. He sat back. He picked up his phone and called a day's Bowen in Chicago. She answered on the Tenagant ring. "You saw it," he said. "I saw it." Her voice was level in the way voices get when they're working to stay that way. Both versions. "The lawsuit dropped today. Silence. 1.2, Corbett said. More silence. "He's representing himself," Corbett said. "I called the county clerk." Adize made a sound that wasn't quite a word, but carried everything it needed to. "I'm drying up Saturday," Corbett said. "I already called Devin. He's flying in." "I'll take the train Friday night," Adize said. She didn't ask whether she should come. The question wasn't available to her. "He hasn't called anyone," Corbett said. "Of course not. He never did." "No," Adize said. "He never did." There was a pause. "He drove 3 hours to my regional qualifier once," Corbett said. "Didn't tell me until after. He drove 6 hours to mine," Adize said. "Left at 2 in the morning. I found out from my coach's assistant 3 weeks later." "Devin's gonna cry," Corbett said. "Devin cries at commercials." "Don't tell him I said that." "I'm going to tell him immediately." Corbett called Devin Grant after he hung up. Devin answered from somewhere loud, the sound of a gym in the background, somebody working amid the rhythm of real effort. "I know," Devin said, before Corbett could start. "You've been following it. Since day one." A pause. The background noise dimmed. Devin walking somewhere quieter. "I tried to call him 2 weeks ago. Number's the same. He didn't pick up. He never picks up." "He never picks up," Devin agreed. Then, after a moment, he caught that kid's neck. "I know. He was going headfirst into concrete and the man caught his neck." "I know." While the kid was swinging a water bottle at him. "Devin, I'm just saying. I know what you're saying." Devin was quiet for a moment. "What do we say when he tries to send us home?" Corbett thought about it. About a man who had coached him from 14, who had driven 3 hours to a qualifier and never said a word about it, who had lost his son and locked the door on the only thing he'd ever been truly exceptional at, and spent 9 years mopping floors for a gym that called him a liability on the day it needed to protect itself. "We say what he told us," Corbett said, "when we were nothing, when we didn't believe we were going to make it." Devin waited. "Nobody fights alone," Corbett said. He said it before every bout, no exceptions. The sound of the gym in the background, someone counting reps, a door closing somewhere. "I'll see you Saturday," Devin said. Monday night. Elijah's at the kitchen table with a yellow legal pad, working through what he knew. Not legal strategy. He didn't have the language for that. Just facts, timeline. What had happened in what order, who had seen what. He had 4 pages. He'd been at it since incessance. Outside, headlights crossed the window. He looked up, then a second pair, then a third, 3 sets of headlights in his driveway at 10:15 on a Monday night. Car doors, 1-3 not hurried, solid. He stood up slowly. The knock when it came was quiet, almost respectful. The knock of people who understand that the hour is late and the situation is not simple, and the person on the other side of the door did not ask for this visit. Elijah opened the door. Corbett Washington filled the left side of the frame. 40 years old, broad through the shoulders, a winter coat with road salt on the toes of his boots from however many miles he'd driven. His face was tired, and also something else, something older than tonight. Adize Bowen, standing straight in the way that 20 years went to train makes permanent. Her eyes were the same as they'd been when she was 17, steady and not easy to lie to. And behind her, Devin Grant, 44, gray at the temples, wearing a jacket with his gym's logo on it. His jaw was tight. His eyes were bright. He was losing the battle to keep his face professional, and he knew it, and he was going to lose it anyway. Nobody spoke for a moment. Elijah looked at the 3 of them on his porch in the November dark, and 14 years stood behind them all. "You stopped answering calls," Corbett said. "So we stopped calling," Adize said. Devin cleared his throat. "Coach." His voice was level for exactly as long as it took to say that one word, and then it wasn't. He pressed his lips together. Tried again. The second try wasn't much better. "We're here." Elijah Cross looked at 3 faces he had spent years building from nothing. 3 people who had driven through the night or booked early flights and shown up at his door without being asked, which was the only way he would have ever let them come. He looked at them for a long moment. Then he stepped back from the door. "There's coffee," he said. They sat in his kitchen until 2 in the morning. Corbett laid out what he knew about the case. Devon had already spoken an attorney, a real one, not court-appointed, who was prepared to take it on reasonable terms. Adaze had 4 pages of notes on her phone organized by category, written on the train. Precise and thorough. The way everything she did was precise and thorough. Elijah tried twice to tell them they didn't need to do this. Devon set his coffee down the second time. "Coach," he said, "you taught us the first rule of the corner." Elijah looked at him. "Nobody fights alone." Devon looked back. "You said it every time, before every bout, no matter what. No exceptions." Elijah was quiet. He looked at his hands on the table, the wide knuckles, the calluses, the hands that had taped Caleb's wrists before every tournament they'd ever gone to together. Small wrists that had gotten bigger over the years until they were a young man's wrists, and the tape went on differently. And sometimes Caleb would look up at him while he worked, and they would not say anything because they had learned to be quiet together, the two of them, and the quiet was good. For the first time in longer than tonight, the old man ran out of arguments. "There's more coffee," he said, "if you want it." Adaze stood up and found the pot without being shown where it was. Southside Detroit hummed and went about its November business, and in a small kitchen on Crane Street, 4 people sat at a table together, and something that had been locked for 14 years was beginning, slowly and without ceremony, to come open. The courthouse on Scrayett Avenue was built to make people feel small. High ceilings, marble floors that turned every footstep into a statement, long corridors with tall windows that let in light but not warmth. Elijah Croissant had been inside twice before in his life. He was wearing the same suit both times, dark navy, white shirt, a tie Ruth had picked out that he'd kept in the back of the closet because he couldn't donate it and couldn't wear it for ordinary things. He'd pressed it himself the night before. Slowly, getting the creases right, his hands were steady. He sat alone at the defendant's table with a yellow legal pad, a pen, and 4 pages of notes. Sandra Polk, the attorney Corbett had arranged, sat 1 row behind him in the gallery. Elijah had been clear. He wanted to sit his own table. He was not a man who needed someone else to hold his words. The plaintiff's table had 3 people: Carter Reeves, gray at the temples, a suit that cost more than Elijah's monthly rent had ever been, the posture of a man who expected to be the most important person in any room. Damon sat beside him, arm in a sling that matched his team colors, looking at the table, just the table. Carter sat very still, the way men sit still when they've already decided how the room ends. Judge Carol Whitman entered at 9:02:58, reading glasses on a chain, a face that had learned to hold its conclusions until the right moment. She looked at both tables. She looked at the gallery. Reporters in 3 rows, Simone Walsh in the 4th, Corbett, Adaze, and Devon in the 5th, Theo Burgess and his mother 6 rows back. She called the room to order. Hargrove opened with the edited video. Of course she did. 90 seconds. No shove, no money, no water bottle, no hand at the neck. She played it twice. Then she used the phrase class concealed combat training 4 times in 11 minutes and the word dangerous 3 times. And when she turned to Elijah, her voice carried the weight of someone who believes the conclusion is already written. "Why would a martial arts master spend 9 years push and pop, mister? Cross, what exactly were you hiding from?" The room leaned in. Elijah opened his mouth, closed it. There were true things he could say. Some's doors on open. Some's belong to the person who carries them. He looked down at his legal pad, said nothing. Hargrove smiled just enough to let the silence do her work, which was when the doors at the back opened. Corbett Washington came up the aisle in a state athletics jacket. Half the gallery recognized him before he reached the front. Whitman allowed him as a character witness over Hargrove's objection, and Corbett raised his right hand and looked at the press row without performing for it. "The man at that table is Elijah Cross. We called him the Quiet Hand. He took me from a 14-year-old kid who couldn't keep his chin down to a national champion. He did the same for 2 other people in this room today." He looked at the gallery. Stand up. Adaze rose first, immediate. Then Devon half a second behind her, Adaze Bowen, 2-time national judo champion, Devon Grant, undefeated in kickboxing, 9 gyms across 5 states. Hargrove objected on relevance. "Counselor," Whitman said, "you spent 30 minutes arguing this man's training history." "His training history just stood up in my courtroom." Overruled. Corbett waited for the room to settle. Ant asked what he was hiding from. His voice dropped. "I'll answer it. Because he never will. Elijah was very still. 14 years ago, Coach had a fourth student, the best of us. His name was Caleb Cross. He was 21 years old. He died on Interstate 75 driving to the biggest fight of his life. Corbett stopped. His jaw worked. Coach buried his son on a Friday, locked his belt in a box, never coached again. He looked at Elijah. He didn't quit the mats because he was dangerous. He quit because he was trying to forgive himself for something that was not his fault. That's your hidden threat, Your Honor. That's what 9 years of mopping floors was about. The room held what it had been given. At the defendant's table, Elijah's shoulders dropped, not in defeat. In the way it drops when a person has been carrying it alone for a very long time and someone has finally taken part of the weight. He did not cry. He had done his crying in rooms this courtroom would never see. But his eyes went somewhere past the middle distance and stayed there. And in the third row, a reporter pressed her sleeve against her face quickly and looked back at her notepad. Hargrove recovered, pivoted to the medical evidence, challenged the angle of Camera 3's footage when Simone submitted the drive. She was technically accurate. Camera 3 had limitations, small scaps, arguable ones. Then Paulette Burgess stood up in the gallery. 43, a nurse. The posture of someone who has learned to be steady in rooms where steadiness is most needed. My son sent me something the night of the fight, she said. He didn't know what to do with it. He thought his mother might. She held up Theo's phone. Whitman asked to see it. Looked at the footage for 40 seconds, handed it back. Place it on the screen, she said. Theo had been standing against the back wall of the gym. From his angle, you could see the full mat. Both men. And at the very start of the footage, before the timer, Damon Reeves crossing to where Elijah stood and putting both hands on the older man's chest and shoving. Not arguable, not a matter of angle or lighting. There, the water bottle was there too, the arc of the swing, the path it would have taken, and then the hand. Elijah's right hand open, cupping the back of Damon's neck, pulling him away from the concrete, laying him down on the soft vinyl. From Theo's angle, you could see Elijah's face in that moment, turned slightly toward the camera without knowing it was there. He did not look angry. He did not look triumphant. He looked the way people look when they do something without deciding to, because the decision was made so long ago, it lives below the level of choice. The room was quiet for 3 full seconds. Whitman asked for the last 8 seconds again, watched the hand, asked for it one more time. Then she set her glasses on the bench and looked at the plaintiff's table. Carter Reeves sat very still. The way men sit still when the room has shifted and they are no longer the reason for it. Whitman gave them 30 seconds. Counselor, Hargrove stood. Your Honor. The plaintiff moves to withdraw the complaint. With prejudice, the gallery exhaled. Withdrawal granted. Whitman looked at Carter for a long, unhurried moment. This court will also note that the question of how the plaintiff's footage was edited, and by whose direction, would appear to be of considerable interest to the city attorney's office. The gavel came down clean. The room began to move. Elijah sat. He did not move with the room. He sat with his hands flat on the legal pad and felt something he hadn't felt in a long time. The absence of the thing he'd been carrying, not gone, but lighter. Changed in some way he didn't have language for yet. A decency appeared at his shoulder. She put her hand there, light and steady, and left it. Then the chair scraped. Damon Reeves stood up. Carter's hands went to his arm, automatic. The reach of a man who has been managing his son for 26. Damon looked at the hand, then he stood, all the way up, and Carter's hand fell away. He lifted the sling over his head, set it on the table. Everything Washington said is true, he said. Everything in that video is true. I shoved him before the timer. The money was real. The water bottle was real. He stopped. He didn't throw a single punch at me. The third fall my head was aimed at concrete, and he caught me. The man who spent 3 weeks trying to destroy caught my head before it hit the floor. The room was quiet enough to hear the ventilation. My father has never watched one of my fights from beginning to end. Not one. He watches the last 10 minutes. He reads the numbers afterward. Damon didn't look at Carter when he said it. I won 4 fights trying to make him stay in the room. That's what the followers were. That's what every clip was. Not a career. Just me trying to be impressive enough. He turned to face Elijah. He bowed. Deep, held it longer than was comfortable. The bow of someone who had never bent toward anything with their whole self before. I'm sorry, Mr. Cross, he said, for all of it. Elijah Cross looked at him for a long moment. He thought about Caleb at 8 years old, small hands in gloves, 2 sizes too large. Dad, I don't think I'm doing this right. And Elijah getting down on one knee. The back foot goes here. Stay down with your chin and up with your eyes. He looked at Damon. He did not answer immediately. Some apologies need time before they can be received. The receiving is the hard part, and the receiving, when it's real, cannot be rushed, but he would answer it. Not today. In the only language that mattered on a map. The consequences arrived the way consequences always arrive, not all at once. Patiently. Damon's titles were placed under review. His sponsors released statements containing the word values multiple times. Carter's downtown partners withdrew from an ongoing project without public explanation. Jerome Nash resigned before the board meeting that had been scheduled to discuss him. The Iron Summit board called Elijah in on a Friday, offered him the head coaching position, full salary, his name on the wall. "I'll take it," he said, "on one condition. Tuesday and Thursday evenings the main mat belongs to the neighborhood. Free, no fees, no membership. Everyone who walks in gets taught." They agreed and said, "The program," Elijah says. "The program has a name, the Caleb Cross program." Nobody in the room argued with that. The first night, 31 adults sat on the main mat. Elijah walked in carrying the wooden box. He drove a small nail into the wall near the door, hung the photograph face out, Caleb at 17, grinning, forever about to win. He opened the box, lifted out the small uniform, folded it one final time, placed it on the shelf below the photograph, placed registration form beside it. Then he lifted out the black belt, tied it around his waist. 2 knots, the muscle memory of 10,000 times. His hands did not shake. He looked up. "First lesson," he said, his voice carried to every corner. "The strongest thing you will learn on this mat is how to walk away from a fight. The second strongest is making sure you can." 40 minutes in, the door opened. Damon Reeves, plain gray, sweats, white shirt, no logo, alone. He stopped at the mat tape. Elijah looked at him. Then at the supply closet. "Take the floor teaches first." Damon reached in, took it out. "How?" he said. Elijah stood beside it. Just the grip showed him the angle. "Long," he said. "Even. Don't cross your own path." Nobody laughed. Not one person. Elijah Cross still arrived at 5 in the morning. He still read the floor, still folded the rags in thirds, still noticed who was favoring a knee they weren't mentioning. The photograph by the door faced out now. He talked to it small things, how the Tuesday group was coming, which of the newer people had started helping the beginners without being asked, which was always the seal sign. Every November 14th the program held no classes. The mat stayed empty, the lights stayed on, no one scheduled it, everyone honored it. One Thursday in December, Theo Burgess earned his first stripe. For the old man only. Elijah laughed, real, from the chest. Later, Simone asked what the boy had said. The old man picked up his mop. That's between a coach and his fighter, and he kept mopping, long strokes. Even, not crossing his own path. 60 Seconds Part 3. What doesn't move? The courthouse on Gratiot Avenue was built to make people feel small. High ceilings, marble floors that turned every footstep into a statement. Long corridors with tall windows that let in light but not warmth. The architecture said so without saying it, that what happens here matters, that the people inside are accountable to something larger than themselves. Elijah Cross had inside twice before in his life, once for a traffic matter in 1987, once when Ruth had needed him there for a property dispute the year before she got sick. He wore the same suit both times. He was wearing it again now, dark navy, white shirt. A tie Ruth had picked out that he'd kept in the back of the closet because he couldn't bring himself to donate it and couldn't quite bring himself to wear it for ordinary things. He'd pressed it himself the night before. Slowly, getting the creases right. His hands were steady. He sat alone at the defendant's table with a yellow legal pad, a pen, and 4 pages of notes he'd written at his kitchen table the night the summons arrived. Sandra Polk, the attorney Corbett had arranged, sat 1 row behind him in the gallery. What Elijah had been clear about one thing. He wanted to sit at his own table. He was not a man who needed someone else to hold his words. The plaintiff's table had 3 people. Carter Reeves, gray at the temple. A suit that cost more than Elijah's monthly rent had ever been. The posture of a man who expected to be the most important person in any room and saw also reason today should be different. Damon sat beside him, arm in a sling that matched his team colors, which was either a coincidence or wasn't, looking at the table, not at Elijah. not at the room, just the table. The particular attention of someone who has decided the surface directly in front of him is all he can manage right now. Carter sat very still beside his son, hands flat on the table, eyes on the middle distance, the posture of a man who is accustomed to waiting for rooms to arrange themselves around his preferences. Hargrove sat at the far end, arranging materials with the precision of someone whose ritual has become instinct. With suit, gray voice. The kind of competence that made you tired just watching it work. Judge Carol Whitman entered at 9:02:58, reading glasses on a chain, a face that had learned somewhere over the decades to hold its conclusions until the right moment. She looked at both tables. She looked at the gallery, which was fuller than civil proceedings usually drew. Porters in 3 rows, Simone Walsh in the 4th, a small cloth bag beside her. Corbett, Adaze, and Devon in the 5th. Theo Burgess and his mother 6 rows back. Theo sitting with the stillness of someone who has just understood that this Tuesday morning is going to be one of the days he tells people about. The judge looked at Elijah, at his legal pad, his pen, his pages of notes. She looked at him for a moment that held something unreadable in it. Then, it keyed the room to order. Hargrove opened with the edited video. Of course she did. 90 seconds. No shove before the timer. No money on the mat's edge. No water bottle. No hand at the neck. What remained was an old man in a strange uniform, throwing a younger man down 3 times while a crowd watched. She played it twice. Then she stood at the podium and used the phrase concealed combat training 4 times in 11 minutes. She used the word dangerous 3 times. She talked about Damon's medical report with the gravity of someone describing something irreversible. When she turned to Elijah, her voice carried the particular weight of someone who believes the conclusion has already been written, and the proceedings is just the formality of getting there. Mr. Cross, what belt do you hold? I hold no belt, Elijah View said. Rank fades when you stop wearing it. Mr. Cross, what rank? A pause. Black belt, he said, 3 disciplines. The murmur in the gallery went up a register. Whitman looked up from her notes. The room settled. Hargrove turned to the judge. Your Honor, a man with that level of training is not a civilian in any meaningful sense. He is a weapon that worked in close proximity to gym members for 9 years without disclosure, without anyone being informed of what they were standing next to. She let that sit. Why would a martial arts master spend 9 years pushing a mop, Mr. Cross? What exactly were you hiding from? The room leaned in. Elijah's hands were flat on the table. He looked at Hargrove. He opened his mouth, closed it. There were true things he could say, accurate things that would answer the question directly and completely. But some doors don't open in public. Some things belong to the person who carries them, and not to the room that wants to see them. He looked down at his legal pad. He said nothing. Hargrove smiled, just enough to let the silence do her work, which was when the doors at the back of the courtroom opened. Corbett Washington came up the aisle in a state athletics jacket. Half the gallery recognized him before he reached the front. The other half recognized him by the time he raised his hand to be heard. Whitman allowed him as a character witness over Hargrove's objection. Corbett raised his right hand and took the oath, and then he looked at the press row without performing for it and without avoiding it. My name is Corbett Washington, 3-time national middleweight champion, current head coach of the Ohio State University Combat Sports Program. A pause. Not for effect, because the next part needed a moment. Sitting at that table is Elijah Cross. We called him the Quiet Hand. He took me from a 14-year-old kid who couldn't keep his chin down to a national champion. He did the same for 2 other people who are in this room today. He looked at the gallery. Stand up. Adaze's Bowen stood first, immediate, without waiting to be named. Devon Grant stood half a second behind her. The gallery murmur became something louder. Whitman's gavel came down once quiet, and the room settled without going all the way back down. Adaze Bowen, Corbett said. 2-time national judo champion. Devon Grant, undefeated record in kickboxing, owner of 9 gyms across 5 states. Hargrove was on her feet. Objection. Relevance, counselor, Whitman said, with the patience of someone who has heard this argument before and finds it less convincing each time. You spent 30 minutes arguing this man's training history. His training history just stood up in my courtroom. Overruled. Corbett waited for the room to settle again. You asked what he was hiding from, he said. His voice dropped a register, which made the gallery lean forward. I'll answer it, because he never will. Elijah was still at his table. 14 years ago, Coach had a fourth student, the best of us, better than me, Nadeze, better than Devon, and Coach never said that out loud, but we all knew it. Corbett stopped. His jaw worked for a moment. His name was Caleb Cross. He was 21 years old. He died in a car accident on Interstate 75, driving to the biggest fight of his life. The room was quiet in a way that courtrooms rarely achieve. Coach buried his son on a Friday, locked his belt in a box. He never coached again. Corbett looked at Elijah. His voice had developed a quality he was working to manage and not quite managing. He didn't quit the mats because he was dangerous. He quit because he was trying to forgive himself for something that was not his fault, that he blamed himself for anyway. For 14 years. He looked at the room. That's your hidden threat, Your Honor. That's what 9 years of mopping floors was about. The room held what it had been given. At the defendant's table, Elijah Cross looked down at his hands. The hands that had taped Caleb's wrists before every tournament they'd ever attended together. The hands that had folded the registration form and locked it in a box and worn the key against his sternum through 14 years of early mornings and empty chairs and a photograph face down on the mantel. His shoulders dropped. Not in defeat, not in shame. In the way that something drops when a person has been carrying it alone for a very long time and someone has finally, without being asked, taken part of the weight. He did not cry. He had done his crying in rooms this courtroom would never see. But his eyes went somewhere past the middle distance and stayed there for a moment. And in the third row, a reporter pressed her sleeve against her face quickly and looked back at her notepad. Hargrove recovered. She was too good not to. She pivoted to the medical evidence, addressed Corbett's testimony as emotional rather than factual, brought the edited video back up. She was technically correct about everything she said. She was working with a picture that was missing. Simone Walsh was called next. She came to the stand in the clothes she'd worn to her new job that morning, having taken the time off because what was happening in this room mattered more than anything else happening anywhere else today. She brought the external drive in the small cloth bag and held it in both hands, the way you sold something that has cost you something to keep. She was calm. She had been calm since the night she sat in her car in the driveway and made the decision. Some decisions, once made, give you a strange stillness, she explained the drive. 9 months of footage copied nightly before the security system ran its overwrite. She explained the moment Jerome Nash had called her into his office and told her, looking at the wall rather than at her, to make sure Samassant was compliant with the retention policy. He had not known she had already been making copies for months. He had told her to ensure the deletion of footage that no longer existed in only one place. The room understood what that meant. Whitman's expression didn't change, but something behind her eyes did. The footage from camera 3 played on the court screen. Both men. The full match. What it showed clearly. Hargrove challenged the angle. Camera 3 was positioned high and to the left. The initial confrontation near the wall was partially obstructed. She was accurate about this. The footage had gaps, small ones, arguable ones, the kind a skilled attorney can work with, which was exactly when Paulette Burgess stood up in the gallery, 43 years old, a nurse at Detroit Receiving who had spent 2 decades being present in rooms where things were either going to get better or they weren't. She had the posture of someone who has learned how to be steady in the exact moments when steadiness is most needed. She stood without being asked. "My son sent me something the night of the fight," she said. Her voice carried without effort. The room was already quiet for her. He didn't know what to do with it. He's 19. He thought his mother might know. She held up Theo's phone. Sandra Polk was on her feet immediately. Whitman asked to see the phone. A court officer brought it to the bench. She looked at the footage, 40-some seconds. Her face gave away nothing. She handed it back. "Play it on the screen," she said. Theo Burgess had been standing against the back wall of the gym that Saturday. His angle was different from every other phone in the room. He'd arrived early and taken a spot near the exit because he'd thought he might need to leave quickly if things went somewhere he couldn't be part of. He was 19. He'd had that calculation running. The result was a wide angle from the opposite side of the room from camera 3. From his position, you could see the full mat, both men, the crowd on 3 sides, and you could see the edge of the room, where at the very start of the footage, before the timer started, Before the crowd noise peaked, Damon Reeves crossed to where Elijah was standing and put both hands on the older man's chest and shoved. Not arguable, not a matter of camera angle or lighting. There. Clear, a few seconds before the timer. Seconds that the edited video had removed because those seconds changed the meaning of everything that came after. The water bottle was there, too. The arc of the swing, the path it would have taken, and then the hand. Elijah's right hand, open, shooting out to cup the back of Damon's neck. The pull, the correction of the fall's angle. The moment Damon's head changed direction and away from the concrete lip and toward the soft vinyl. From Theo's angles, you could see something camera 3 couldn't show. You could see Elijah's face in the moment he made that choice. Turned slightly toward the camera without knowing it was there. He did not look angry. He did not look triumphant. He looked the way people look when they do something without deciding to, because the decision was made so long ago and so deeply that it lives below the level of choice. Of course you catch the neck. Of course you redirect the fall. Of course you protect the person even when that person swung steel at your head. Because the mat is not a place for that kind of ending, and it never has been. The room was quiet for 3 full seconds after the footage ended. Not the quiet of shock, the quiet of comprehension. The stillness of people who have just watched something they cannot arrange into the story they came in with. Judge Whitman asked for the last 8 seconds, played again. The officer rewound, played it. She watched the hand. She asked for it one more time. Then she set her glasses on the bench and looked at the plaintiff's table. Carter Reeves sat very still. The way men sit still when they realize the room has shifted and they are no longer the reason for it. Whitman gave them 30 seconds. Then, counselor. Hargrove stood, still precise, still measured, the training holding even now. Your Honor. The plaintiff moves to withdraw the complaint, with prejudice. The gallery exhaled. Not a cheer, too complicated for a cheer. The sound of a room releasing something it had been holding since the proceedings began. Withdrawal granted. Whitman looked at Carter for a long, unhurried moment. Long enough to be deliberate. This court will also note that the question of how the plaintiff's footage was edited, and by Howe's direction, would appear to be of considerable interest to the city attorney's office. The gavel came down clean. The room began to move. Reporters angling for the door. Gallery members turning to each other. Hargrove packing her briefcase with the focused efficiency of someone who has decided the fastest exit is the best one. Elijah sat. He did not move with the room. He sat with his hands flat on the legal pad and felt something he hadn't felt in a long time. Not the absence of the problem. Something quieter than that. The weight of what he'd been carrying still present, but changed. Lighters, in some way he didn't have the language for yet. Adiez appeared at his shoulder first. She didn't say anything. She put her hand there, light and steady, and left it. Devon was 2 steps behind her. His jaw was tight, and his eyes were bright. And he had stopped trying to hold his face together about an hour ago. He stood at the end of the table and looked at the old man and opened his mouth and closed it, because some things don't improve by being said. Corbett stood at the corner of the table. He looked at Elijah, and Elijah looked at him, and 14 years stood between them and also something else now. Something that had been a wound for so long it had started to feel like a feature of the landscape. A hill you walked around because you'd stopped remembering there was another way. Corbett nodded once. Elijah nodded back. Then the chair scraped, a specific sound in a room that was so still full of noise, and it cut through because of what followed it. Damon Reeves stood up. Carter's hand went to his arm immediately. The automatic reach of a man who has been managing his son's behavior for 26 years, and whose body learned the gesture long before the brain decided to make it. Damon looked at the hand on his arm. He looked at it the way you look at something you have been looking at your whole life and are finally seeing clearly. He stood all the way up, and Carter's hand fell away. He lifted the sling over his head, set it on the table. His shoulder was fine. It had been fine since the day after the fight. The medical report was accurate in the way that accurate things can still be used toward inaccurate ends. He looked at the room. The cameras found him. Of course they did. He had spent his entire adult life being found by cameras. He knew the weight of being watched and the temptation to arrange yourself for the watching. He didn't arrange himself. Everything Mr. Washington said is true, he said. His voice was level in the way voices get when the true thing is harder to say than the convenient one. Everything in that video is true. I shoved him before the timer started. The money was real. The water bottle was real. He stopped. He didn't throw a single punch at me. Not one. The third fall, my head was aimed at concrete. He caught me. A pause. The man I spent 3 weeks trying to destroy caught my head before it hit the floor. The room was quiet enough that the ventilation system was audible. My father has never watched one of my fights from beginning to end, Damon said. Not one. Whilst he watches the last 10 minutes, he reads the numbers afterward. He comes twice a year, stands by the door, checks his phone, and leaves. He didn't look at Carter when he said it. He looked at the room, at the reporter, at the people who were going to carry this story out of here and put it somewhere. I won 14 fights, 14, and he's never once asked me how I felt after. Carter Reeves sat very still. I've been fighting since I was 19, trying to make him stay in the room. That's what the followers were. That's what every clip was. Not a career, not content. Just me trying to be impressive enough that someone would look at me and stay. He stopped, breathed. The only person who actually looked at me on that mat was the old man I was trying to humiliate. In 60 seconds, he showed me more about how I actually move than 3 years of training. I didn't understand that then. I understand it now. He turned. He faced Elijah Cross at the defendant's table. I picked November 14th for the fight, he said. I didn't know what that date was to you. I know now. I can't give it back. I know that. His voice broke slightly on the next part, and he let it. I can't give any of it back. He came around the plaintiff's bowl, crossed the floor, stopped a few feet from Elijah, and bent forward into a bow, unpracticed. Nothing like the technical bows at the beginning and end of thousands of training sessions. This was the bow of someone who had never bent toward anything with their whole self before, and was working out what it required. He held it. Then he straightened. I'm sorry, Mr. Cross, he said, for all of it. Elijah Cross looked at the young man standing in front of him, 26 years old, sling on the table, the cameras on him, the father behind him sitting with hands flat, and something collapsed in the architecture of his certainty. Elijah thought about Corbett at 14, who wanted to quit every third Tuesday. About a Diaz at 15, who thought crying after a loss meant she wasn't a real fa. About Devin at 13, angry at everything, channeling it all into his hands until he learned to put it in his feet first. He thought about Caleb at 8 years old. Small hands in gloves, oxed 2 sizes, too large. Dad, I don't think I'm doing this right. And Elijah getting down on one knee. The back foot goes here. Stay down with your chin and up with your eyes. He looked at Damon. He did not answer immediately. Cease.
Some apologies.
Beef received. The receiving is the hard part, and the receiving, when it's real, cannot be rushed to fit the moment that's asking for it. He would answer it, not with words, not today, in the only language that had ever meant anything on a mat. The consequences arrived the way consequences always arrive, not all at once. In the patient, administrative way of things, currently catching up to the distance they've been traveling. The State Athletic Commission reviewed the unedited footage and suspended Damon from sanctioned competition. His regional titles were placed under formal review with a clear expectation of what that review would find. His sponsors released statements containing the word values in every other sentence. His manager stopped returning calls. Carter Reeves's situation developed more slowly because careful men have more layers to get through. The city attorney's office opened an inquiry into the edited footage. 2 downtown development partners withdrew from an ongoing project, not publicly, just a call from their attorneys. That kind of thing spreads the way cold spreads, decision to decision, until the absence of warmth becomes its own weather. Jerome Schlesat resigned before the board meeting that had been scheduled to discuss him. He sent an email. He collected his things the evening before, in the way people collect things when they know the alternative is having them handed back in front of witnesses. Smolsch declined 4 calls from news stations. She had a position at a law office starting in 2 weeks, and a clear sense of what she'd done and what it was worth, and none of that arithmetic required a camera. The Iron Summit board called Elijah in on a Friday afternoon. He sat across the table from 5 people who had walked past him in that building for 9 years without learning his name. They offered him the head coaching position, full salary, benefits, his name on the wall by the entrance. Elijah listened, folded his hand. I'll take it, he said, on one condition. They waited. Tuesday and Thursday evenings, the main mat belongs to the neighborhood. Free classes, no membership required, no fees. Everyone who walks through that door gets taught. They discussed it. For 4 minutes, they agreed. One more for a thing, Elijah said. He looked at each of them. The program has a name, the Caleb Cross program. Not the gym's name, not a sponsor's name, that name. Nobody in the room argued with it. The first night of the Caleb Cross program, 31 adults sat on the main mat. Different ages, different reasons. Each of them carrying whatever had made night feel like the right time to begin. Theo Burgess, that near the back. He'd signed up the morning after the board meeting, before the program was officially announced. He was still a beginner, still working on the chin, still having good days and bad days with the back foot, but he came every Tuesday. Every Thursday he came. Elijah walked in carrying the wooden box. He drove a small nail into the wall near the entrance, hung the photograph face out. Caleb at 17, grinning under the banner, holding the truth that was half his size, looking at the camera like the world was a very good place to be, forever about to win. He opened the box. He lifted out the small uniform, white gone cream with age, the size of an 8-year-old learning where his back foot was supposed to go. He folded it one final time, placed it on the shelf below the photograph, placed the registration form beside it, C Cross Fighter at 00047. The name in a font that didn't know. Then he lifted out the black belt, tied it around his waist, 2 knots, the muscle memory of 10,000 times. His hands didn't shake. He looked up at 31 faces. First lesson, he said, his voice carried to every corner. The strongest thing you will learn on this mat is how to walk away from a fight. The second strongest is making sure you can. He let that sit. We start with how you stand, because everything comes from there. 40 minutes into the class, the door opened. Damon Reeves, plain gray sweats, white shirt, no logo, alone. He stopped at the mat tape, the line on the floor that marks where the training space begins. He bowed, deep held it. Mr. Cross, he said when he straightened from the beginning, whatever it requires. Elijah looked at him for a moment, then he looked at the supply closet near the entrance. Open that door, he said. Damon opened it. Inside, a mop, a bucket, cleaning supplies arranged on the shelf, with the neatness of someone who had believed for 9 years that how you cared for a floor said something true about who you were. Take the mop, Elijah said. The floor teaches first, everything else comes after. Damon reached in and took it out. He looked at it. He looked at Elijah. How? He said. Elijah crossed to him, stood beside him, adjusted. The grip showed him the angle, the stroke that reads the floor instead of just pushing water across it. Long, he said. Even. Don't cross your own path. Damon looked at the floor. He started. Nobody in the room laughed. Not one person. 31 people returned to their stances and their work with the focus of people who have just witnessed something and want to honor it by getting back to their own purpose. Corbett Washington leaned against the back wall. He watched Damon move the mop. He watched Elijah watch Damon. Then he looked at Adieze beside him. She was watching the photograph near the door. Caleb at 17 looking out at the room where his name now lived. 14 years, she said. 14 years, Corbett said. Is it? Devin Scrant was 2 steps to their left and had stopped trying to hold his face together about an hour ago, and nobody was going to mention it. 6 months later, the Caleb Cross program had a waiting list. 1 location became 2, 2 became 4. By spring, it was running in 7 cities, not because Elijah organized any of it, but because people called. A coach in Cleveland who'd heard about it. A community center in Cincinnati that reached Devon. Each location opened the same way. A wooden box, a photograph, 2 knots. Damon Reeves was at Iron Summit every session by December, easy to miss now, which was new for him. He wore plain white like every beginner. He swept the mat before class and mopped it after, in long, even strokes that didn't cross their own path, because he had asked the old man to show him how, and the old man had. A reporter found him in the parking lot one December evening. "Is this a redemption arc?" she asked. Damon thought about it. "No," he said. "It's just Tuesdays." He got in his car and drove home. Every November 14th, the program held no classes. The mat stayed empty. The lights stayed on. No one scheduled it, and everyone honored it. And that was how the things that matter tend to work, sustained not by policy, but by the understanding of people who know why. One Thursday in December, Theo Burgess earned his first stripe. He'd been working on the hip rotation for 2 months, finding it, losing it, finding it again. The actual shape of learning any physical thing. Not a straight line, a spiral that tightens over time until the right position starts to feel more natural than the wrong one. Elijah tied the stripe on at the end of class. Theo leaned in and said something quiet, for the old man only. Elijah looked at him, and then he laughed, real, from the chest. The laugh that comes from someone who hasn't been caught off guard by something genuinely funny in a long time. Later that evening, Simone asked what the boy had said. The old man picked up his mop. "That's between a coach and his fighter," he said. And he kept mopping, long strokes, even, not crossing his own path. Cross still arrived at 5 in the morning. Some habits are the bones of a person. He still read the floor when he walked it. Still folded the rags in thirds with the corners meeting exactly. Still noticed who was favoring something they weren't mentioning. The photograph by the door faced out now. He talked to it. Small things. How the Tuesday group was coming along. Which of the newer people had started helping the beginners without being asked. Which was always the real sign that someone had started to understand what the mat was actually for. People still stopped him on the street and asked about the 60 seconds. They wanted to hear about the throws. He always said the same thing. The throws weren't the point. They looked at him. What was? He thought about a boy at 8 years old. Small hands in oversized gloves, a key worn warm against the sternum for 14 years, 2 chairs in a cemetery and the gray of Detroit before first light. For 9 years, a man swept floors in that building and nobody asked his name, he said. It took 60 seconds of the wrong kind of attention to make the world curious about someone that 60 seconds of the right kind would have shown them all along. He picked up his bag. Don't wait for the mat to find out who's standing next to you. Then he went inside, because the 5 o'clock floor doesn't read itself. And the photograph by the door was watching over the room. And there was work to do.